in reference to creating safety in our schools, I'm going to talk about the Safety Kid model because this is a model that actually is research-based, that is implementable in all schools. And this model is really proven to create a safer environment within schools. So when we bring our program into schools, we start first with school administration. And we actually provide a very comprehensive workshop for school administrators, really focusing on what we call the foundation of safety within the school.
Abusers groom children, meaning they start preparing them, so to speak, to God forbid, become victims, but they also decide which children are safe that they feel they can get away with abusing. And in that case, even a little bit of information, if the children exhibit some signs that someone's coming too close to them, it's just a quick look. The abuser says, oh, this kid was spoken to.
Children need to walk into our building and feel safe. And in order to do that, there are some policies in place that any school can put in place where you start the conversation before they even walk in the door, literally. So on a staff level, every single staff member is fingerprinted. I can't believe this is not mandated, but I heard in some states it's not. Before you walk in the door, you have a contract with us that involves you getting fingerprinted, as well as how we deal with this type of issue and policy.
I think that, I guess, one of the nice things about working in a camp or in any organization is that there is a team. And I think each of us knowing our role within the organization and who we report to, and that we're not doing it alone. That, you're going to consult with somebody else, that there's somebody else who's going to understand the discomfort in making the report, that there's somebody else who's going to understand the necessity in making the report.
I believe we're making a really big dent in this issue, and we're really, as a community, making a difference. And I think the reason is because we're talking about it, is because we're doing things just like we're doing together tonight, is that we are creating a culture and a community that recognizes that we have to communicate about these things. And the only way to do that is to increase awareness that these issues can occur and do occur, and how we look out for them and how we communicate about them.
Dr. Berger mentioned it. It's not a simple process, but it's an important process, and it's something that has to get done, and people have to learn how to be comfortable doing it and guided through it properly to make that happen. So just want to acknowledge that piece. In terms of change and the constant evolving and more standards and being sharper and more thoughtful and more holistic. And when I came in, NCSY did not have or any part of the OU did not have, let's say, a social media, boundary guidelines, because there was no such thing as social media. It wasn't there. And, we had to develop those policies, and then we had to roll them out. And definitely not simple to do.
Welcome back to the Jews Next Door podcast, where each month we explore a different topic of our parenting hierarchy with the goal of raising the next generation of passionate committed Jews. I'm your host, Rabbi Menshel, and this month we took a break from this parenting hierarchy to really do 4 episodes on this topic of child safety in honor of Child Safety Month. And the first 3 episodes we spoke about, the parent-child relationship and the healthy home, and the 3rd episode we spoke about the role-playing, the types of conversations that we should have with our children. And in this episode, it's going to be a little bit different, where we're going to be focusing on the ways that organizations in the Orthodox community, both, camps, schools, and organizations, have done work in this area of child safety and have shown real improvement. We'll be having a guest host, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who is the executive vice president of the OU, who is going to lead this roundtable conversation in 2 different segments, with the first one focusing on schools and the second one focusing on organizations. So without further ado, enjoy the episode.
My name is Moshe Hauer, Rabbi Moshe Hauer. I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Vice President of the Orthodox Union, the OU. This month, November 2023, through and in partnership with our Gen Aleph program, we have dedicated the month in participation with a national program called Child Protection and Safety Month to the subject of child safety. Child safety is a subject which in our community has, thank God, received significant attention over the past years. The first 3 episodes, which were done by Gen Aleph, aimed at parents, parental education, to understand the issue, to be well educated as to how to interact with one's own children around this issue. This episode, we are presenting as a discussion of institutional safety, of schools and other institutions within our community, creating the safe environments for our children to be able to ensure that our children remain safe. And if, heaven forbid, there's any kind of an infraction on child safety, that we deal with it well. It's an area which throughout the world has had significant progress since a time not long ago, a time that many of us can remember within our own professional lives. We were, so to speak, in the dark ages, completely unfamiliar and unequipped to understand the risks and to respond to them. And over time, thank God, we've come to understand them a lot better, to respond to them better, and even more important, to prevent them significantly by creating safe environments in schools and other Jewish institutions. Change is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. But, sometimes when you have a chance to see how change has occurred over time, it's incredibly inspiring and incredibly rewarding. And it's beautiful to see how far the community, the Jewish community specifically, and its organizations has come over the past couple of decades in this area. There is always room for improvement and enhancement. And I think we see constant effort to make things better and safer and stronger. And our goal in this episode is to be together with professionals in the field who can present stellar examples, beautiful examples of how to create institutional safety. And in this first part of the discussion, I have the privilege to be joined by Mrs. Debbie Fox, who is the founder and director of Magen Yeladim, Safety Kid, a program which is a pioneering program in bringing safety to schools within the Jewish community, within the Orthodox Jewish community specifically. And I can never speak about Debbie without noting she has been a personal mentor to me for, I think, close to 30 years in addressing these issues. And her counsel and her wisdom and her experience have served me and many, many, many people very, very well, many communities extremely well. And we're grateful for her being here. Rabbi Yakov Horowitz, Rabbi Yanki Horowitz, is also both a very dear friend and a very treasured mentor, an example of someone who is, besides being a mechanech, an educator par excellence, the founding dean of Yeshiva Darchei Noam in Muncie, and a strong child safety advocate, and someone who has guided and inspired so many of the critical movements of social challenge in the Orthodox community over the past decades. And he's here tonight to speak from all those perspectives, and especially as an implementer par excellence of school safety in the school that he founded and led for so many years. And finally, Mrs. Ahuvah Heyman, who's the school director of Benos Yisrael in Baltimore, another example of outstanding leadership in implementing the creation of a safe environment in a school, in a beautiful school that I know from up close, from just about a 7-minute walk from my house in Baltimore, and a wonderful school. And we're here to have this discussion, to see how it's done, to see, so that all of us, members of the community, to see what schools are doing to create safe environments, and to really show an example for those in the field, to see how accessible it is to create truly, truly safe environment to the extent that we have the ability to do so. So I would like to begin by turning to Debbie and asking you, Debbie, you're a pioneer in the field. You have guided schools in the multi-track, multidisciplinary paths which are needed in order to be able to create safe environments on all fronts. And if you could speak a little bit about your experience, about what it looks like, what school safety and the implementation of school safety looks like.
Thank you, Rabbi Hauer. Always an honor to work with you and to work with the OU and to be on this team. It's really an honor. So in reference to creating safety in our schools, I'm going to talk about the Safety Kid model because this is a model that actually is research-based, that is implementable in all schools. And this model is really proven to create a safer environment within schools. So when we bring our program into schools, we start first with school administration. And we actually provide a very comprehensive workshop for school administrators, really focusing on what we call the foundation of safety within the school, really looking at safe hiring practices, at them setting up professional boundaries for their staff members, looking at safe environmental issues within their schools, where are areas that really need to be supervised, the concept of having glass on each door so that people can see in. All of those factors, abuse-related policies, all of those factors that create a foundation for safety within the school. And so we start with administration. Our next step is that we go to staff. And we go to staff, we focus with staff on what's the staff role in keeping children safe. And we look at their professional boundaries. How can they make sure that whatever role I'm playing is within my professional boundary as a teacher, or whatever your staff role is. And then we look at how can staff know what the signs and symptoms of abuse are? Because the bottom line is, if staff can pick them up, what's going on with the kids on a day-to-day, if staff can pick that up, they can help prevent problems before they hit red flags. When they're pink flags, they see the kids more hours a day than anybody else in the child's life. So if we give them those tools, then they then can really be the eyes and the ears of social workers. They can determine when something's happening with children and get those children help at the earliest phase. We teach them all kinds of skills, how to handle a disclosure, how to know what are the characteristics that they might look for in a predator. What can a teacher know that can empower a teacher to help our kids? And then
can I interrupt you? Can I interrupt you for a second, Debbie? Because I think that's a very important distinction that came out in this, which is that part of creating a safe school is that the school shouldn't be the source of the problem. And part of creating what you're talking about is that the school is part of the solution for problems which occur outside. Many times when we think about these problems, we think about stories which make headlines, which sometimes actually grew out of institutions. But the vast majority, I believe the data is that the vast majority take place in homes and places outside of these. But the school is really at the forefront of being able to do early identification and intervention. So it's not just the school as not being the cause of the problem, but it's also the school as being the source of the solution. That's part of what you're educating.
Yeah, 68 to 70% of abuse occurs in the home. And so we want to make sure that children in school are safe. And by teaching everybody what the standards are, by teaching a staff together, and by also letting teachers know that our job is to create a school that's not safe for predators. And the more we all know what our standards are, all of us, the whole staff, the more we all know, then if something that happens that goes against those guidelines we've set up, it's our responsibility to say something to an administrator or supervisor, because that's what creates safety for all of us. So we want that safety in school, But we also feel, like Rabbi Hauer, you just mentioned, is that we need those educators who see the kids more hours a day than anyone else to take a role in picking up issues that are happening outside of school and to know what to do with them, to know who to go to know how to get the right help. There's a lot of focus on how do the teachers get that right help. And then we go to the parents. And our parent workshops are very focused on prevention. What are the conversations that parents need to have with their children to focus on prevention? It's only after we've gone to administrators and staff and parents that we create a shield for children. Then we go in and teach children what they need. But the adults are responsible, and we have to create a safe world. And I just want to throw in one statistic that to me is very meaningful, which is almost anybody you go to, any workshop you go to will say that the statistics are 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys have been molested before the age of 18. But I want to say that Dr. David Finkelhorst, who's a top statistician today, he says that it has changed to 1 in 10. Now, 1 in 10 is not a great statistic, but it's a dramatic improvement over 1 in 4 and 1 in 7. And his comment is that there is a lot more awareness today. And the awareness that equates to prevention is when you have administration, staff, and parents educated before children. And so for every school to look at that model, however they look at it, I think that really focuses on creating a safe school for our children and for our staff.
Okay, remarkable and comprehensive, very comprehensive. Rabbi Horowitz, speak about it from your perspective as a school leader. How does it feel to how does it work to implement this? How tedious is it? How liberating is it to be able to have the clarity of guidance, around it?
Thank you, Debbie. That was really excellent, and her program is fantastic. And it's just the way she described, to have each of those pieces, because, like as Debbie said, we know a great percentage comes from the house, so we need people outside the house telling the children, So that's really a wonderful approach. I would just like to speak to 2 components, in addition to what Debbie's saying. One is a concept called institutional grooming, and I would encourage parents to have a quick look at it. The theory is that abusers groom children, meaning they start preparing them, so to speak, to God forbid become victims, but they also decide which children are safe that they feel they can get away with abusing. And in that case, even a little bit of information, if the children exhibit some signs that someone's coming too close to them, it's just a quick look. That first, the abuser says, "Oh, this kid was spoken to." I give an example. If you invited someone to your Shabbat table, or you went out to a restaurant together with your whole family, how old would a child have to be to know that someone's violating norms of regular eating rules of how we eat? If someone took a piece of chicken with their hands, how old would your children have to be to see that, observe it, start to giggle or look back a bit? Because the norm is that we don't eat with our hands. So when somebody does invade, if the children are accustomed to having personal space, if someone invades that space, that's not what they're used to. So they just, that quick look, they're so attuned to it. You may want to read an article called, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a fantastic piece on the Penn State scandal called In Plain View. I really encourage you to have a look at it. He explains grooming in a very user-friendly way. So abusers groom institutions. They want to see which institutions are safe for them to, God forbid, set up shop. Therefore, in addition to what Debbie's saying, that's step number 1. The next step is talk about it. Send a memo to the community saying we're doing a safe. Put a sign up on the bulletin board with child safety rules. Do that in your shul, in your synagogue. So you get messaging out to parents in just that you got game. And sometimes that can be enough to deter an abuser to go elsewhere. It's just
Could I ask you?
Please.
Could I ask you when you introduced it to your yeshiva,
Mm-hmm.
when you introduced safety education to your yeshiva? I don't know if when you started it was already in place. I think it may have been. When you introduced it to a group of educators who had functioned previously without it. How did it go down?
So, it initially, the very first time you do it, there's going to be a little bit of resistance. So people will look around and, start asking questions. The first time I had that reaction was Torah Masorah back in 2003. Torah Masorah, which is a network of day schools all across North America, they published an addendum to a contract that at the time very, very few schools were using. And I called a staff meeting and told the staff that we're going to, next year, I'm going to be attaching it to the back of the contract. And the fellows went out and they started asking their colleagues, and none of the other schools were using it at the time. And they got like a little bit offended. And like Rabbi Horowitz, and I said, if you want to make sure, in other words, that the contract, that addendum detailed what's appropriate behavior in terms of interaction with the children, in terms of the types of things you talk to kids about. And so I told them, I said, if you want to be sure that you're on the safe side and that nobody could ever make an accusation against you, just follow those 2 pages. It just tells you exactly what you should and shouldn't do. When we have problems, and this is what I told them, we have problems when it's not clear. And people, especially today, that look in those 20 years since then, as you mentioned, as Debbie mentioned, I didn't hear that statistic, the 10%. That's really what I'm saying. Not saying that's good, 1 in 10, but it's much better. It shows that education works. So that concept of getting it out there as an institution, of making a statement that we're doing that. Another example I gave, I sent an email to my list and posted on social media for a few years before Simchas Torah that I'm encouraging shuls to have somebody go around and lock up all the unused space where an abuser could, God forbid, harm a child. Lock up the boiler room, close the empty classrooms, but make an announcement also. Get up and make an announcement, have the president make an announcement. We closed off. You may notice that these spaces are open. We closed them because Simchas Torah is a less structured time, and we want we want to make sure that our children are safe. And we ask every adult to please keep an eye open. And if there's, it's a terrible thing to say, but if you have X number of people in a room, there's going to be people that have a propensity to abusing. They hear this loud and clear. And that's what this concept of an institution being forward about not only doing what Debbie's describing, but talking about it and making it part of the culture of the school. It reinforces what you do, and it helps message the abusers with exactly what we want to tell them. So the answer to a long answer to a short question, Rabbi Hauer, it was at the beginning, back then, certainly, it was a little bit, delicate, but I explained to them that it's for their safety. It's for not only the safety of the children, it's for your safety. Because when there's ambiguity about simple questions, should a teacher take a child home from if the child misses the bus? Simple questions that were different 10 and 20 years ago. So it's the more precise we are, the more we talk about these things, the more we hash through them and develop policies, the safer our schools are and the less confusion there is around situations like this.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Mrs.Heyman, parents, students, bringing them in. It's one thing, professionals, creating the administrative norms, the staff norms.
Right.
educating a whole community of parents and of students on such a delicate subject. Tell us a little bit about how it works.
Okay, so it's, in my opinion, it's very easy if you do it from the beginning and you're not scared to take the leadership from the people who know better than you, from the Debbie Foxes and the Rabbi Horowitz, and Dr. Pelkowitz. We established the school, Mrs. Itzquit started the school 24 years ago based on safety and trust. Children need to walk into our building and feel safe. And in order to do that, there are some policies in place that any school can put in place where you start the conversation before they even walk in the door, literally. So on a staff level, every single staff member is fingerprinted. I can't believe this is not mandated, but I heard in some states it's not. Before you walk in the door, you have a contract with us that involves you getting fingerprinted, as well as how we deal with this type of issue and policy. Once you walk in the door, we want every child to feel safe. So we do a few things that I'm telling you, any school can do, and it's not even expensive. It just changes the culture of walking in the door. So I'm going to give you a few examples. Number one, we don't allow children to come into school and be in an unmonitored location. That's even with every door with a glass window and every locked place heavily locked. We lock places with key cards. So if there is a boiler room and we don't want anyone in there, nobody can get in there. Not enough to just have a lock that was put in 80 years ago. So when the children walk into school, the preschool children gather in a central location and they are welcomed by a preschool teacher. Then they are walked to the next preschool teacher and they are escorted basically to their classroom at the time that school is supposed to begin. The elementary girls, they go into a large lunchroom. They line up with their teachers. There's no opportunity. We're not giving girls an opportunity to be alone in a space that could prove to be a not safe space. Our teachers are hired knowing that they're going to be at recess and they're going to be at lunch. I don't know about boys' schools. I'm a girls' school person, but where do you think the most drama happens in girls' schools? It's always at recess and lunch. And the more supervision there is, not on top of you, not letting you move. Supervision means there's a safe adult, a good Debbie Fox term, there's a safe adult, a safe person around for a child to go to.
Can I interrupt you?
Of course.
I just want to note for those who are listening to this and think that this sounds like West Point, that B'nos Yisrael of Baltimore is like the warmest,
right,
coziest school that anyone could imagine. So what's being described is very thoughtful and very deliberate and very careful, but it is not cold and regimented at all.
People call it camp.
I was just going to say, if I may interrupt, Rabbi Hauer and Ahuvah, when you have rules like this, the children get more comfortable because they know that if Debbie's program is implemented, that means that everybody around, this is something that we're talking about. And I know that the Magen Yeladim representative or whomever it was that spoke to us told us about that we have a right to our personal space, and this, so that it brings comfort. Of course, it's done in a way that's kid friendly, but I propose that it makes kids more comfortable knowing.
I absolutely agree. It's an intentional culture, right, and that culture starts from the top and it works its way down. It makes staff members comfortable. It makes students comfortable. Another example I can give is that in our preschool, elementary, and middle school bathrooms, the main door is not allowed to be closed and locked. Obviously, in an individual stall, everyone has privacy, but a bathroom area that normally is behind closed doors, we want our girls to know that they don't need to be worried. We're not even talking about the most egregious offenses. We're talking about anything that makes a child feel unsafe, which we know occurs nowadays. We have a no bullying policy. We just can't allow girls to come to school and not feel safe. In addition, we are all mandated reporters, and we need to take that role seriously. So if a child feels comfortable, and another way we make them feel comfortable is we have social workers starting in preschool, and you learn from when you're young that speaking to an adult is safe. And speaking to an adult who's there to keep you safe is a very, very, very beneficial thing. So we have a postcard system where any young child can leave a postcard by the social worker's mailbox, literal mailbox, and they'll be called out to discuss whatever is bothering them. So one of the big jokes that we have in our school is that kids make meetings to speak to the principal, and they also cancel them when they work the things out. They don't need the meeting anymore. We're giving them the power to know that we want them to be safe, but we're also giving them the tools to know that they can also work things out on their own. So obviously, as the girls get older, it gets more complicated, and we need to think about where they are in each stage. But we have no problem letting the child know there's an adult here to keep you safe. The adults know they're here to keep you safe. We have rules. It's a girls' school, so I'll tell you, we have rules up until what age a teacher can touch a child's hair. I know that sounds maybe strange for the boys' schools, but little girls like when you braid their hair and you brush their hair. And in a very young age, like 3 or 4 year old, that would be okay. As you get older, we don't allow that. We don't allow children sitting on laps after a certain age. None of this is to make us this cold, like Rabbi Hauer said. It's to make us a warm, safe, loving place where children can come. And if, chas v'shalom, there is something they need to share, they're most likely to share it with somebody they're going to trust. And that trust gets built by coming to a school where they know they're that important and that we believe them.
Wonderful. Debbie, so what does it involve to bring a school up to speed? You spoke about all these 4 things. So making sure there are glass in the windows happens once, presumably, until the school expands or grows or changes. Teachers, like how frequent, how often, how much of an investment of time and energy is there in the administration of a school in order to make sure that everybody's up to snuff, that all the 4 pieces that you described are in place?
I think that's an important question, but I feel like what both Ahuvah and Rabbi Horowitz said really are the answers, which is it's not about the time, it's about the dedication. It's about really setting the forum and the format within your school that everything falls into place. So, like, for instance, in reference to what Ahuvah says, one of the things that we suggest is when you interview a teacher, just interview them. You're not hiring them, just interview them, show them your conduct policy, and let them know this is part of our hiring process. And pay attention to their response. One thing I'm going to tell you is most predators don't want to get caught. If in your interview process, you're showing them a policy that clearly is letting them know this is not a safe place for a predator, the high likelihood is they're not going to pursue your school. And that's exactly what you want, right? But if you're setting up supervision, you're setting up the forum and the format, the institution, so that you are following guidelines together, and it all works together. So if we talk to the administrators, let's say, about professional boundaries, then I want to go to Rabbi Horowitz's point. He's talking about how do we prevent grooming in schools, right? So then we have to talk with staff members about what is grooming and what are the guidelines for staff. Like, how do you handle individual interactions? When are there questions about boundary violations? What would you do if you didn't know? Should I be, Rabbi Horowitz brought up the example of, should I be taking that child home who missed the bus and it's snowing outside and he's freezing and he's standing out there alone? Do I just put him in my car when we're not supposed to? Or what should I do? Right? Whatever that is, what we teach them is, if you're concerned about, could this be a boundary violation? What do you do? Right? So that you have a forum and a format for figuring out, how do I deal with the potential boundary violation? How do I take, we want them, and we're clear that within our world, having a warm relationship with students is important. We never want to take that away. And we're hearing that from Ahuvah within her school as well. I experienced it in her school. But we want there to be warm relationships. But part of what we stress is warm relationships need to be equal. everybody has to have access to warm relationships, not just one child or two children. And prizes have to be equal access so that we're not developing a relationship with only one child or only two children, but that whatever we do, we're not promoting grooming environments. And so it's about really that which we're looking at that foundation with administration has to actually be actualized within the staff. We have to train them in that way as well. And I think that what Ahuvah described is a perfect system, which is we all work together. And when parents know as well, and when we train parents that if you have a concern, communicate, talk with us, let us know what you're concerned about. Some of that can be easily handled. Some of that may be more complicated, but it creates safety for everybody, most importantly, the students. And I just want to say, Rabbi Hauer, in this day and age, I often say to staff members that when I was a kid, and my father was the principal of my school, but a child would never go home and tell a parent you got in trouble in school, because if you did, you got in trouble again. There was never a chashash that the teacher was wrong, never. And when I say to teachers today is, how many of you believe it's that way today? That there's no chashash that teachers are wrong. Nobody will raise their hand. They feel very often like the immediate assumption is it was the teacher's fault. May have been the child's action, but somehow or another it's the teacher's fault. So really keeping to these guidelines makes teachers safer too. So it's really helping to make the teachers safer as well as the students. And the institution's liability.
Rabbi Horowitz, could you speak? Did you want to say something specific?
I wanted to drill down for a moment, if I may, on Ahuvah's beautiful presentation, rules, and explanation of them, and take the thing what you said about the hair, right? That at a certain age, it's appropriate and proper to fix a child's hair, but after a certain age, it's not. It's a very, very important point there, because schools could disagree about what age that is. This isn't cast in stone. So one school might say after third grade, one school might say after sixth grade. And they're both okay when the schools communicate the policy to everyone, that all the staff knows, the administration knows, and the parents and everybody knows that there is a policy. So one policy doesn't fit all. I was actually retained by a number of schools. Rabbi Hauer, you asked how schools take it. I was retained to sell it to the staff of the school, particularly the Judaic studies staff. And the research shows that if a school prints up a policy and says, okay, here's the policy, everybody, the research shows it's far less likely to be followed than if they get input from the teachers. And a teacher should be able to say, well, fifth grader, I can't touch your hair. That's fine. You hash it out among yourselves, come up with the policy, and all schools won't have the exact same policy. But as long as it's communicated precisely, some schools might say somebody should never take a child home in the car. Some will say, well, if it's daylight hours and you call the parent first and it's a 10-minute drive, then you could do it. So each school could have, and they should have, different policies. There isn't one person that has, the control over this or decides what to do. It's an organic process. The head of the school leads that process along with a professional. I worked with Dr. Shira Berkovitz, who was really excellent. And the consensus, putting it in writing, getting it out to everyone. Then everybody knows, everybody's comfortable doing what they're doing. You can express affection to your children a certain way. I know some summer camps say you can touch on the shoulder, on the arm, but not on the shoulder, whatever. They have rules of how to do it. Once the people know it, everybody's okay. They don't have to look over the shoulders, and they can express affection and support for kids in a way that's within those guidelines.
Right.
Thank you. Mrs.Heyman, could you speak a little bit about that second role of the school of noticing, of being aware of what's going on with the kids and being able to flag a situation?
100%. So we're very lucky the way the school is structured. It was started by Mrs. Itzkowitz. She's still there. She's the one who insisted on social workers from the beginning. But every part of the school has a mini school. So there's a preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school. And in each division, there are three main goals. There's the educational, there's the emotional, and then there's the social. And we all work together to help with that. In order to do that, there's the educators, there's the special educators, and then there's the guidance counselors. So we meet often to discuss all the children of the school, and we listen to each other. When Debbie said there are pink flags, a lot of times if you recognize pink flags, you never get to the red flags. Even if people are upset or people think you overreact or people think, why are you making a big deal? We have trained ourselves to be very, very aware. A kid who's always happy and suddenly won't eat her lunch. A kid who used to be the life of the playground and is standing on the side. What's going on here? And if you have that relationship with the parents where they're going to expect that you're going to call and reach out, sometimes you find out it's something minor, but sometimes it's something major. And for whatever reason, the parents didn't communicate. And sometimes we hear and we're like, of course that child is bitza'ar. Now we need a plan to how we're going to help them. It doesn't mean that chas v'shalom, the worst thing happened to them, but life happened. And nowadays, I was joking last week when I said our children are being raised in a society where they have exposure to everything that none of us had exposure to until we got married. In my life, nobody said the word divorce. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. Chas v'shalom, nobody was sick. Not everything was in our face 24/7. Our children, not only did they live through COVID, but now they're living through a war and the pressure that is placed on them. And say Tehillim now, because if you break the chain, somebody might die. This world has trained our children that they're also responsible for the world. So sometimes you could see a kid who's really struggling and they need a voice. They need someone to take them aside and say, what's going on? What are you worried about? And that's going to create this culture where kids will share. And then, Khalila, when it's a red flag and they need to share to save their lives, they're going to feel comfortable doing it. And we have gone so far as to create lunch groups based around one child's need. We're going to put 7 kids together with an experienced social worker so that child can end up having a voice. Because a lot of times a child doesn't want to be alone in a social situation where they feel uncomfortable. So we'll talk about, what does a healthy friendship look like in a group of 7? What does personal space look like in a group of 7? And we do that all the way up. And our hope is that chas v'shalom, if a child is faced with something that is serious, they're going to reach out to someone. And if they don't reach out to someone, at least they'll give us those, I call it silent screaming. They're kids that are screaming for help and they're waiting for the adult. They're waiting for the adult in their life to step in and notice. And we should never need all these tools. We should never need the video that's on 24/7 in the high school principal's office, because that's a man. No sound, 24/7. And everybody should know that video is sitting right there. Why? Because everybody should always feel safe walking into a school whose job it is to take care of children. And when I said before, I don't think it's so hard, I'm not minimizing it. I don't think anything we're doing is so incredible, rocket science difficult. I think it's the basics of taking care of Hashem's children. Keep them safe, trust them, and let them know that no matter what comes up, you are there for them.
It's very impactful to hear you describe school safety done right. It really is very, very impactful, and I thank you for that. I'm gonna retrace my steps and just ask Rabbi Horowitz for a moment. Amongst many other things that you have done, you have created a child safety book. So I think we could say you know how to speak to children about this issue. It's I don't know how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of copies are out there at this point in time. But we've spoke. I think other elements of this podcast have spoken about parents communicating with their children. Just a little bit about the school communicating with the children about such delicate topics and how
we actually designed the book that Dr. David Pelkowitz and Dr. Bezin Tversky reviewed every image and every word, and the nuances were so important because we didn't want to do anything that was frightening. If you look, it's called Let's Stay Safe, where There's a Yiddish version and 2 Hebrew versions. Thank God we're in 140,000 homes already. And if I may, we're doing, during this month, we're doing actually a program. We're offering $5 a book in continental US with free shipping. And it's 10 shekel a book for the Hebrew books. Please take advantage of. We're subsidizing it. I'm glad to raise more money to subsidize more copies. We really want to get a book in every home. But the book is designed, we didn't start right. We want to make the parents comfortable. So we started the book. I'm just using this book as a template for, model for a case study. So we started about crossing the street safely and putting on helmets. And then we went to stranger danger. And then there's 6 pages in the middle that actually talk about the real issues. And even then, there's no frightening images. And the research shows that when parents frighten children, when we talk to them, you want to get their attention, but if you scare them, they don't recall what you said. You can look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs for an explanation of why that's so, or other issues like that. But it's supposed to be, first of all, that book or any talk we do with the kids, it's the beginning of a conversation. We're letting them know that it's okay to talk about this. And Dr. Pelkowitz told us at the time that when parents speak to kids, it should be like a concern level 2, 3 out of 10, 10 being the most scared. In other words, frightening. That enough to know that it's important, but not to freeze them and to get them, intimidated. So it's about a conversation. It's a relationship of trust. Think of what Ahuvah said while you were talking, Ahuvah. I was thinking about that, everything you were saying in relation to a home, and what Debbie was speaking, about the administration, the other people getting it. Couples should have discussions with each other. Even if couples divorced, to have discussions with each other about here's how we're going to introduce these things to our kids. And when are the kids hitting puberty? When do we want to have this conversation with the children? That this should be something that's based on research. And I always think about tell me anything. That's the slogan. Tell me anything. Disclosing that someone's encroaching on someone's space, or God forbid worse, or grooming activities, or God forbid worse than that, is such an uncomfortable conversation for children to have. So we want to tell them again and again that it's okay to talk to us about anything, and that'll serve you well in raising your children altogether, especially because of technology. They have so much access to everything. You'll never know what's really going on if they're not comfortable talking to you. So I think that's overall, Rabbi Hauer, that's how I would describe it as a process. The education we give them is the beginning of that process. And I think when, God forbid, there's a situation that the kids are talking about someone, that there was an abuser, God forbid, or something, when it's out there, that's the time to talk to kids about it.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'm gonna ask the last question, Debbie. Sort of like just circle back to what this has all been about, and it's been very, very helpful. I think trying to show a picture of what this comprehensive education looks like, how creating the safe school environment looks, the various components, and like really great examples of seeing it implemented perfectly and beautifully to create that safety. But from your perspective, as someone who's involved in a very formal national efforts that helps bring these programs to schools, so you've seen it in a wide range of schools in the Jewish community, successes, I assume, sometimes less than successful. How do you see where we've gone in over the past decades and where we still need to go?
That's a good question. I want to say that in a general sense, I am really inspired. I feel that we go around the country and go from school to school, and schools and communities, we often are brought in by an entire community, and we train all the schools in the community at a time. And they are they want this information. And they may not yet be at the level that Ahuvah is describing from Benos Yisrael, but they're all starting somewhere. And it's really inspiring to see that in each community, they want the education. They want to learn how to prevent. They want to learn how to keep kids safe. I really do believe that in general, we have come to the point where as communities, we want more and more information. I can tell you that our program within the Hasidic community is really bursting at the seams. They really have many schools that they're in, many yeshivas, many chadarim, and they're expanding to others. The entire program is in Yiddish and is very, very culturally tailored, but extremely accurate for the Yiddish-speaking community. If you go to Mexico City, we have the entire program in Spanish. They do 5,000 kids a year, every single school in Mexico City. Lakewood, New Jersey. Monday night, I was in Detroit, Michigan. There were 500 teachers there. So what I'm saying is, I'm proud of our world. I really am. And I think that schools are asking me, even begging me, give us better policies for our schools and train us on it. And I am working on developing that. But what I'm saying is I'm finding schools want to know more and are motivated. Now, I'm not going to say that things never happen that schools don't know how to deal with, or that there are really political issues there that are not complicated. But I am going to say one thing. I have found that in this model that we're discussing, where we educate parents, we educate staff, and we educate administrators, that smaller issues are coming to the surface so much quicker and bigger issues are prevented. In terms of, let's say, grooming, when we teach parents about grooming, what should you be worried about? I tell parents, I'm going to teach you the stages of grooming. But what I want you to know most is, what's the gut feeling that you get when I'm going through this with you? Because that gut feeling is going to tell you when your kid is groomed. You got to pay attention to that. What doesn't feel right? What's breaking these boundaries? But then when they pick that up, they'll go to administrators, and administrators are taking it seriously. And so I think that this communication and this awareness within communities, I really believe it's making a difference. We've got a ways to go, but I think we're well on the road.
Perhaps the most important thing that I could say is that having the structure in place is the number one most important thing when you run into a crisis. So Benos Yisrael did experience a crisis. The details are not important, but what is important is that because we had a structure, because we had a policy, because we had the contacts, the Debbie Foxes, the Dr. Pelkowitzes, the Dr. Foxes, the people that we could reach out to help guide us, to help guide our students, to help guide our parents, we were able to emerge. I mean, Khalila, if we wouldn't have had policies in place, including tech policies, our school could have been shut down for many complicated reasons. But instead, we were able to stand up and say, we are trained to know how to deal with this. We are going to be front and center. We're going to be honest with you. We're going to do what we have to do. We're going to make the kids feel safe. We're going to have people come talk to the kids. We're going to have people come talk to the parents. And it should never be that we need it. But one of the biggest reasons to have this foundation and this framework is so that, God forbid, if there is a crisis, you are not alone and you are not left saying, how do I save us? And I cannot express enough how important it is to do things just for that. You should never need it and it should never happen. But having it there when it happens, I always say that about Hatzalah. My husband's a big Hatzalah guy. We should never need it. But knowing it's there is critical. And I cannot say enough how important it is as a school that is responsible for so many children, how important it is to have this structure should, God forbid, there be a crisis.
Thank you for interrupting me and saying that, because that was incredibly valuable. Also, thank you for the guidance to this incredibly experienced podcast host. But I really should have said, do you have any final comments that you want to share before we sign off? So I'm going to now turn to Rabbi Horowitz and ask if you have anything final that you want to say before.
I think this was beautiful. I learned from listening, and just to anyone out there, if you're leading the school, if you have your own family, just realize that you have support, you have help. There are templates. 25 years ago when Debbie and I were talking about this, that people looked at us like we're talking about an invasion, Martians coming into the country, but thank God it's so different now. And you have resources, folks, whether it's a school or it's a family, you have resources for prevention. And God forbid, if there's something going on, you have resources for that too. And Ahuvah, I so concur with you that having those policies allows you to deal, God forbid, when stuff happens, and stuff happens.
Appreciate it. Any final comments? Or I think, if I may just say, again, in appreciation for each of you for giving the time, for sharing of your experience, your wisdom, your practicality. I think it'll be incredibly helpful to all who listen, and I hope many will, and I am confident many will. I also think that this is something we should just pause and think about, especially this is Kislev 2023. Klal Yisrael is going through very, very difficult time. And I think that what we've been talking about here is an example of something that we don't pay enough attention to. What does that mean? We talk about tshuva. Everybody talks about tshuva. We have Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's the season of tshuva. When you think about tshuva, what do you think about? You think about burying your head in the machzor. You think about your little notebook and your cheshbon hanefesh about this thing that you do wrong and that how you're going to improve it. It's a fascinating thing that, the Gemara distinguishes between the tshuva of an individual and the tshuva of a community. And really the whole Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur season is an anniversary not of individual failure. It was a failure of Klal Yisrael. The Jewish people came from Har Sinai and created and worshipped an Egel Hazav. And the timeline of the thing is about the community doing tshuva. And sometimes there's something wrong, something the community doesn't know, something the community doesn't understand, something the community is doing wrong, either omission or commission. And that was certainly the case. That was certainly the case in the area that we're discussing tonight. And listening to this is an incredible example of communal improvement, which was deliberate. All the steps, recognizing the failure, sometimes very painfully recognizing the failure, sometimes forced to recognize the failure, acknowledging the failure, figuring out how we could do better. And like as Rabbeinu Yonah says when he speaks about tshuva, it's also like not an uninterrupted trajectory. One doesn't do tshuva to perfection. One does tshuva to do much better. And then they might slip, they might make a mistake, and then they figure out how to do even better and keep the trajectory going. And I don't think there's any better example than what has been described in this segment. And Debbie's comment about a community that's thirsty for even more knowledge and more ability to do this right is very, very helpful, very inspiring. I want to thank each and every one of you for what you do all the time. I apologize in advance for the hundreds of phone calls that you're going to start getting and emails from people who want to pick your brains further. But they're lucky to have you. We are lucky to have you. Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to continue now with the second part of this discussion about institutional safety in trying to be part of this very important effort of National Child Safety and Protection Month, to use the opportunity as a Jewish community, as the Orthodox Jewish community, to speak about how we make our environment for our students, for our kids, safer, one which really ensures child safety. We spent some time a little bit earlier talking about the critical environment of the school and looked at some outstanding models and examples of how we create safety within a school environment. The school, of course, is not the only organizational environment in Jewish life. And for this part of the program, I'm privileged to be joined by three people who are, each of them, outstanding leaders and implementers of child safety in the community in different fora, and specifically in the world of what we're going to be focusing on is the world of more informal Jewish organizations, informal educational frameworks and programs such as camps, youth groups, and the like. Our guest who will be speaking about this, Lauren Shaivitz, who is the director of Chana, which does that in Baltimore for all kinds of every form of abuse that happens within families and relationships, and Dr. Ditza Berger, who is a psychologist who also serves as the camp psychologist for Camp Sternberg, and in that capacity is charged with educating staff and creating that safe environment, for that child safety environment for the camp, and finally Rabbi Keevy Fried, who in his professional life is the director of a Jewish graduate organization, a wonderful organization on campus for graduate students all over the country. And Rabbi Fried previously served as associate international director of NCSY, and in that capacity was involved in implementing and enhancing safety standards across many of the informal programs, all of the informal programs of the Orthodox Union, including NCSY and Yakov and JLIC and OU Israel's youth programs. So each of you brings a special experience and expertise to be able to share with our community, to be able to share with listeners, to speak a little bit about what it looks like, and what it takes to create that safe environment for kids, for people within our community. So perhaps, Lauren, if I could ask you, from your perch, from your framework, not so much running a youth program, not running a camp, but there to monitor and to assist in creating safety and responding to incidences of failures of safety. Could you start us off talking about what it looks like, what it would look like to create that kind of safety within our organization?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be here with all of you to talk about this really important topic. And I would say that I believe we're making a really big dent in this issue, and we're really, as a community, making a difference. And I think the reason is because we're talking about it, is because we're doing things just like we're doing together tonight, is that we are creating a culture and a community that recognizes that we have to communicate about these things. And the only way to do that is to increase awareness that these issues can occur and do occur, and how we look out for them and how we communicate about them. And I think the byproduct of having this awareness and this increased level of education throughout the community is that it also helps to reduce shame, so that when something happens, people feel like they can come forward and they can talk about it and they can identify things earlier. And the earlier we are able to recognize something, the greater we're able to mitigate harm. And so, in Baltimore, we have been implementing Safety Kit in almost all of our schools, and we are seeing the impact of that. We are getting calls from community members that see concerns much earlier than they would have years ago because of the information that they're learning, and because it's been made okay to talk about it and to call an organization such as Chana to say, I noticed this behavior in this child. Is this something that I need to be concerned about? And how do I handle it? And how do I make sure that this child is safe? And I think that that is a tremendous, tremendous success.
Thank you. I agree when we observe it. In fact, on the first part of this, Debbie Fox, who created Safety Kit, she cited a statistic from excuse me that I don't remember the name of the doctor, that when not so long ago, 20 years ago, approximately, the statistics were 1 in 4 for girls and 1 in 7 for young men had experienced some kind of incidents of abuse. And he says now the statistic, the way they see it, is 1 in 10. And while 1 in 10 is still, it's way too many, but it's still, maybe my numbers are wrong. I'm sorry, but it's something like that. It is just seeing that difference. Like, what changed? What changed was that education, and that the people are familiar with it. So the early identification, the noticing does it. So yes, these conversations are profoundly important. Dr. Berger, in Ditza, in bringing forth, in bringing that environment as you prepare, you have a huge staff, so many kids. So what does it look like in advance of the summer in Camp Sternberg to make sure that summer is going to be a safe summer?
So first of all, again, I'm going to echo what Lauren just said. Thank you for having me as well. And I guess I'm going to give other thank yous here, because one of the brachos in working in a place like Camp Sternberg is that I'm not creating the wheel. Rabbi Greenwald was there. He was the founding director of the camp. And this was something that was very near and dear to his heart. And he hired mental health professionals way before most other camps were doing it. And I know, Baruch Hashem, now there are many camps within the Orthodox community who do this. Certainly NCSY is ahead of the curve on this. But the reality is that Rabbi Greenwald really started this, and I walked into a system that was looking to really enhance this aspect. And when we speak to our staff to begin with, and we talk about the role of each staff member, the first role that everyone has is ensuring the safety and well-being of each of our campers. And the safety includes psychological safety in addition to physical safety. And the camp employs a multi-pronged approach before the summer starts. That approach includes letters to parents, asking parents to really speak to their children beforehand about appropriate personal safety. It includes staff training. We do staff training, obviously, when we get to camp, but we have a staff training that goes on before camp where we really discuss safety and abuse prevention. And abuse prevention includes sexual abuse. Abuse prevention includes emotional abuse. Abuse prevention includes physical abuse. I mean, the reality is anything that happens on the outside, unfortunately, happens on the inside. And a big piece of the education is like letting people know that we do know what could happen. We're on top of it, and we do monitor throughout the summer. We have educational programs throughout the summer for our staff, and the kids know that we're accessible, so that if we have a problem, we hope that, as Lauren said, as early in the problem as possible, if we can nip it in the bud, because people are aware of these things.
Rabbi Fried, Keevy. So what were the big pieces? What were the rocks of creating policies that could really work and comprehensively address the issue?
Sure. So I, first of all, thank you for having me as well. Also, it's great to be here with everybody. And I agree that the more we talk about it, the better it'll get. And the more we realize that we need to do. And I think that is really a key to creating really good standards and policies. And looking at it like that is that there's always more to do. Can't rest on our laurels or think about that there's a complacency just because there's a good level of a standard that's been created, because at one point there was a gold standard. It doesn't mean that it's the gold standard forever. You need to keep your eyes open, constant review, staying with the times and understanding how trends change in the world of education, in the world of child safety, understanding technology and social media and every aspect of those things, and figuring out how to incorporate that into a good set of standards. And it doesn't just happen out of one mind. I think that having a group of people really work on it. When I worked on it for the OU, the different departments within the OU, it wasn't just the professional staff that thought about how this could be a great set of standards. It was full out interviews, staff, volunteers, participants, parents, lay leaders, anybody from anything, volunteers that would show up at programs, anything and everybody and everything and everyone were interviewed and really looked at from a holistic approach of how to approach the standards from every which way and every angle. I think something that Lauren said before was really keeping our eyes open. And I think that is really the key to developing them and being able to see things, smell things, realize things, take things, under account to develop them. It's interviews, it's surveys, it's keeping up with the times, it's thinking sometimes even in somewhat of a hypochondriac sense. That's the right word. That like, what could go wrong? What possibly, if the furthest possible away from something, but like, what's the little tiny thing that could go wrong? And you plan for that because it could go wrong and it could happen. And the only way you're going to be able to approach it is if you really think like that and dig deep into every single aspect of it and understand every aspect of it from all the people that I mentioned previously, so that you could find what needs to be improved on, what needs to get better, and how to make that work from every. So from a standard development end of things, I think that's a great approach. And the in person, actually seeing it, going to an NCSY Shabbaton and seeing what that's like, going to a Yachad, program and participating in it and getting a feel of what that looks like and what things are going on or not going on over there, is really to be a Bucky, I guess, in all sense, but to do it from a holistic approach of, 5 different angles, looking at it and approaching it. All those people, Bucky's in it as well also.
Okay. And you did this with professional consultation of people who did this in other realms as well.
Correct. I worked with when I was with the OU, I worked with an outside consultant who was an expert in these areas, and it was a joint effort. While I might be a social worker, I'm not necessarily trained in all these aspects. So the OU decided to bring in an outside person who was trained in all these aspects to help develop and build out these policies and standards.
Great. Thank you. So, Lauren, when we think about it, when we think about safety, and we talked about this a little bit when we spoke about, the schools as well, there are obviously multiple pieces to safety, but creating a safe environment, having the staff educated, parents educated. In many of these programs, it's even sort of pseudo professionals, camp counselors or youth group leaders, having them all educated. Part of it is also is being able to prevent things happening in the environment of the school, or in this case of the camp or of the youth program. And part of it is also noticing and understanding the kids who are coming in, where really a lot of the abuse which occurs, people put a very high percentage of it, stuff which happens in the home and things like that. When you think of the role that these kinds of programs have in the lives of the kids and the students, what would you emphasize in terms of seeing the kids and seeing what's happening with them to be able to address what's going on in the rest of their lives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, like you said, most abuse happens in the home. The majority of abuse happens in the home. And one thing that we know is that it's very rare that a child discloses on their own independently that they are being sexually abused. These disclosures usually come out accidentally. They come out because they're talking to a friend about something and an adult overhears, or they start acting out with some sexualized behavior, or there's some other behavior that's identified. And so creating the education that we're talking about, that people know what to look out for, that people know to look for those subtle nuances or changes in behavior or something that their gut's just saying doesn't seem right, and to believe it. Sometimes I think what happens, and I've heard over the years with schools, is they hear things that seem off and they just don't feel right, or they see a behavior that really is inappropriate, but it's easier to find an excuse for it. Oh, the child maybe they have some attention issues, or maybe something else is going on. But we really need to believe what we're seeing, and we really need to explore more. And oftentimes that means bringing in professionals who do this day in, day out, and are able to really assess the situation. Unfortunately, I would also say along with that, some of the things that I say when I speak to groups and I speak to parents and they ask, what do we look out for in our behaviors in children is, unfortunately, sometimes what we see is that the perfect child, the child who does everything right, who never misbehaves, who's going to get it right all the time, actually might be the child who's being sexually abused because they don't want anyone to know. They've been groomed to say, don't speak up. This is what will happen if you speak up. You can't tell anyone. And so they are going to act perfect. And that's a really scary thing to hear. But it's something that we really educate people about, that if this child is good in every other area, don't ignore the warning sign you might see just because this is from a kid from a good family and behaves great in every other respect. We still need to pay attention to it.
Okay, great. Dr. Berger, Ditza, you described how Rabbi Greenwald, when he built the camp, this was part of the values and the culture of the place. We want to make sure that you're not just having a good time, but that this is a really safe, really, really safe environment. How do you build that culture? And does it get in the way? Does it get in the way of it being the kind of warm and welcoming environment? Please talk a little bit about how that looks.
I'm going to answer backwards now. So the answer is no, it does not get in the way of it being a warm and welcoming environment. I think when kids sense that there's a responsibility and a sense of boundaries in terms of what the expectations are, and like even something as basic as we don't keep secrets in camp. That doesn't mean we don't make surprise things. It means that if you share something with me and you tell me that I can't tell anybody else, my job is to tell somebody else. And the staff knows that, and the campers are told that, and the parents are told that the campers are going to be told that. I think that actually creates a sense of safety and security because they know that this is what we're all about. But I'm a very firm believer in the opportunity and power that camp has to be transformative. And that opportunity and power to be transformative in a positive way, chas v'shalom, could also be transformative in a very negative way. We have kids who are away from home. They are meeting with all kinds of other kids. There are discussions that you can't possibly, control all of. And the reality is that we want the kids to leave with a very positive, healthy experience. And our staff has to be on top of knowing what's okay and what's not okay, and what Lauren was saying in terms of the signs, and not making assumptions that because this child has this last name or is behaving so nicely in so many other ways, we can overlook a sign. I think that's an extremely important message. I don't know if I'm answering your question, camp really allows kids to see different aspects of themselves. They see themselves as being valuable members of the community. Kids who can't do well in school can come out of camp shining and glowing and feeling really like they're respected and recognized. And that's a tremendous thing. And I think the safety kids feel in an environment like that is tremendous, as long as chas v'shalom there isn't an abuse of power. And that's why we really emphasize this in our training, and throughout the summer we emphasize this in our supervision.
Keevy, when you have such a dynamic environment, like schools are relatively conservative, meaning you have people, now their career it's a career path. Teachers are signed up. This is what they do for a living. They're fully developed, mature adults. The leaders are people who are organizational people, right? They're there in that frame. When you're dealing with camps and youth movements, where you have a huge number of people who are part-timers, who are volunteers, who are in their late teens or in their 20s, and they have responsibility. When even the leaders of it, you can't be like some guy in a necktie like me, and running it. A leader of a youth movement or of a camp program is going to be like far more. How do you educate for safety with that kind of? Tell us what it looks like. What do you actually do? What do you do to make sure that counselors on or advisors or whatever it is? How do you do it?
It's a challenge. I can't deny that. It's definitely something that that is focused on, and something that took some time to develop in order to properly wrap our heads and perspective around it. But I think it really is a focus from day one. I think that's key. In appreciating that and seeing that it's not there's nothing more important in an organization, be it a camp, be it a nonprofit organization, a youth organization, anything it might be, is that it's great if you know how to be enthusiastic and fun and loosen your necktie around the students, except that none of that matters if you don't understand safety, can't appreciate having your eyes wide open of realizing when there might be challenges or issues, and understanding the protocols. We work through educating from the beginning, training from early on, every staff member, both in written documentation as well as real verbal, oral training, hands-on approach to experiencing things. There's never a volunteer in the organizations within the OU that could be an official volunteer without being trained first. It's just they can't do that. And I'll say, from day one, it's kind of educated and repeated and focused on that there's nothing more important than the safety of the participant, the safety of the volunteer, the safety of the staff person, and the safety of the organization. But with the emphasis really being on the safety of the participant. That is number one, and that is, I can't tell you how many conferences I got up and I said that over and over again. That line exactly. But number one is the safety of the participant. And to go back to something Dr. Berger said, that it actually provides a healthy environment, is once you're able to train and allow people to see through, maybe some examples, made up examples, things that, that could potentially be, and some fun trainings with people on it, but they're able to see actually how it protects the participant, the volunteer, the staff person, and the organization as a whole. Then something clicks. Even for somebody who likes to chill or hang out or have a good time or do something, it's like, oh, right, this is me and my life and my reputation. This is going to protect me. This is the student. This is the participant. This is the person. It's going to be a safe place for them. And then on the other end, I also think is that, it's important for everybody to have somebody to report to and for somebody to be watching them. And I mean that from a staff end of things or a volunteer end of things, is that they might be trained, the staff and volunteer, but then the senior staff has to be trained on even a higher level, so that they could realize when maybe somebody on the junior staff they need to look more into or observe something that's going on there. And the same thing from a teen level. So, yes, generally the young person entering into JLIC or Yakov or NCSY or any other program might be somebody that's there for the fun and loosening up, and it might not be a long-term career from them. There are people in these organizations that do have long-term careers, and it's on them to be properly trained as well, also to be able to look out for what they need to on all the other levels.
Okay, thank you. You used the word report, and I'm going to use it in a different context to turn to Lauren and ask, okay, so we've talked here about the aspects of safety, which are protection, professional standards, creating an environment where people know what they should do, what they shouldn't do, to notice when there's a problem, to be able to guide. What happens when something does go wrong? Something goes wrong inside the organization, or there's a suspicion that something is deeply wrong with a problem that one of the participants is experiencing from outside the program or that has occurred inside the program. So you and your organization, and I know I worked with you and with Chana for many, many years, did a lot when things went wrong, not just work of prevention, but response. And could you, as organizations like this create protocols and systems, like what does it look like to do it, the right way? People should know the clear path around handling when things go wrong.
So, I think obviously every situation is different, but I really think that when someone notices that something's wrong, the first step is always to contact a professional in this field, because one of the most difficult things to understand is that what works and is very successful in one circumstance could actually create more danger in another. And so, one of the things that I really appreciated that Keevy said earlier was thinking about what could go wrong. And in an organization like HANA, that's how we approach everything. That's the essence of what safety planning is all about, is thinking about the consequences, every possible consequence of what could go wrong if we took this action versus that action. Now, we all know that if an organization is working with children, that they are mandated reporters, and that is certainly the starting place for so many of these policies, that they're mandated reporters. But sometimes mandated reporting only goes so far, and we all have had that experience where you make a report and then what happens out of it. And sometimes something happens, sometimes something doesn't. But when you're working with a professional organization, not only can they help advocate with the authorities to try to get it right, and advocate on the behalf of the child or the organization that's noticing things to make sure that this is taken seriously and that safety issues are really thought about well. The organization can also think outside the box. Okay, well, the authorities are going to take it this way. How are we going to really help this family? How are we really going to help this child? What are the unique circumstances here? And again, every situation is so incredibly different. I'm working with a school called us just this week because they observed some behaviors in some children. And it didn't really rise to the level of making a report, but it rose to the level of being concerned. And so really talking through, how do we want to manage this? What should the parents' role be in this? How are the parents going to receive this? Can we get the children some counseling? What is the right avenue and what's really going to work for this family? And so I think if you are fortunate enough to have an organization that is doing this kind of work near you, that's the starting place. Because again, every situation is so, so different. And children are walking around in fear. And when they're carrying the burden of something that might be really going wrong for them, they've gone through a grooming process of don't talk about this. And if you talk about this, no one will believe you. No one will love you. Your parents are going to abandon you. The community is going to ostracize you. There's a million things that they've been threatened with. And so we need to make sure that we don't scare a child off from speaking up, and that we create this space where they know if you speak about this, we are prepared to respond.
Should the organization have like a specific pathway that they put in front of the child, that they put in front of the parent, that they put in front of the staff? If you see something, this is where you need to turn. What is best practice?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that the standards that I've read from the OU are probably one of the best models I've seen of what to do. And the reason why I say that is because it has laid out what is going to happen when any sort of violation of the protocols is observed. And it lays out what it's going to look like, but not only what's going to happen, but who's going to handle that. And far too often, I see policies created that don't really say who's going to handle something. And then a crisis emerges and everybody's running around saying, who do we call? Who deals with this? And in a crisis, it's never the time to figure that out. And so I really, really applaud these policies created by the OU that really spell out, these are the steps we're going to take. And they're very clear, the steps, and who you're going to be in touch with in every possible scenario. And I think that is tremendous. And if I may point out one other thing that I see in those policies that I think are just fabulous is the whole issue about boundaries. And I really, really appreciated that the policies not only talks about mandatory reporting, which we know about, and I'm grateful that those are in there, but it's also about perhaps when something hasn't risen to the level of abuse, or we're observing abuse, or we're concerned about abuse, but we notice that there are these boundaries that are being crossed. And I loved how it talks about emotional boundaries being crossed, and power dynamics, and we need to talk about that. And I think that is also so critical because abuse starts with grooming. And so if we can catch this early, and we can say, wait a minute, I see a power dynamic here. This is who I need to talk to about this. I know who to call. I think that is brilliant. And I think that is so powerful and so effective. And it thrills me to see that in these policies.
Thank you very much. Dr. Berger, you've been practicing in this area 12 months a year as a psychologist in the community, and as well in your capacity in the camp. Could you speak a little bit about the particular challenges, perhaps, that the Orthodox community might face in dealing some of these issues, as with the specific culture and values and halachos of the Orthodox community, and how, again, just like best practice, like how those challenges have been or can be comfortably and successfully overcome?
Comfortably is going to be a bigger challenge than successfully, because I think that one of the biggest fears that most people have is, what if I have to file a report? What if I have to say something? I mean, when I deal with my teenage staff, or I deal with the teenage campers, and they're worried about a friend, but they don't want to tell on a friend because there's a fear of, well, will telling on them make things actually worse? And what I think Lauren was actually referring to that before, or is telling on them, but it's not telling on them, is that the mechanism to get them the help that they actually need. I think that is a very big fear. I think that people are scared of using the system. I think that knowing that the Orthodox rabbinate is behind using the system, I think that knowing that we have responsibilities as mandated reporters is very helpful. But I think comfortably, we're still very far away from that. What I can tell you in terms of comfort, I guess, in terms of, we had a situation, goes back several years, and one of my colleagues actually dealt with the kid post-camp on the referral of another camper. Kid came home, she told her mother, this is what my bunkmate shared with me. The camp was notified. This person put in a report, and it was very interesting because a few months later, they got a call from Child Protective Services basically saying that at the request of the family, they're calling to thank them because they never thought they could get this kid out of the situation. And that was what the mandated reporting actually accomplished. And it's a very scary thing to make a report because, again, you're scared of fallout. You're scared of what could go worse than it actually is. But the reality is you could also be saving a life. And it's not like you make the report and then the sun shines, the birds chirp, and everything is fine. These are arduous, very long processes, and people suffer trauma for a very, very long. I don't even want to say for a very long time because they suffer from trauma. But the reality is that if we do our job and we educate our staff and we educate ourselves, we really could be saving lives, and that's not a small potato. It's a really tremendous responsibility and opportunity.
Keevy, thank you very much. Keevy, introducing change and new practices and new rules into an organization. I'm sure it's just met with welcome. People say, "Great, are there more? Could you give us more rules? Could you give us more limitations?" So, how do people do this? I mean, you came into an organization which already had implemented significant change and had made it a little bit already part of the culture, safety. But then part of your job was, we're not satisfied. We have to make it better. We have to make it more, so to speak, cutting edge. And as you said, evolve with the times and understand the knowledge advances. So what's it like? How much, how do you deal with making it embraced instead of it facing just resistance?
Sure. Before I get to that, I just want to comment on something Lauren and Ditza and Dr. Berger both said in terms of the comfort of reporting and, feeling empowered to do so. It is probably the hardest piece of, or one of the hardest pieces of all this. Dr. Berger mentioned it. It's not a simple process, but it's an important process, and it's something that has to get done, and people have to learn how to be comfortable doing it and guided through it properly to make that happen. So just want to acknowledge that piece. In terms of change and the constant evolving and more standards and being sharper and more thoughtful and more holistic. And when I came in, NCSY did not have or any part of the OU did not have, let's say, a social media boundary guidelines, because there was no such thing as social media. It wasn't there. And, we had to develop those policies and then we had to roll them out. And definitely not simple to do, but the approach generally was that which is just constant communication of it. And again, putting this not as like a 15-minute side thing at a training program, but like this is gonna get 3 hours at a training program. So I was at several of them with Dr. Berger. Like it wasn't an afterthought. Like this is front and center, more important than how to run a chabura or how to do something, how to have a fun trip with participants. Like this is it. And when they realize that this is front and center and this is what that they have to be doing, and that just because you were trained last year doesn't mean that you're exempt from being trained this year, and that it's from the newest person in the organization to the most seasoned person in the organization that has to participate in these things, then it rolling it out becomes rolling it out. At the same time, you have to, like any education, you can't, chazara reviewing is very important, but if you spend a bulk of your time just reviewing, then the new stuff is going to get lost as well also. So you have to find that healthy balance between the chazara, between the review of the ones that are existing and the new, and make sure to teach that, implement that, as well as the new things, and make them, into like a chiddush, make them into something fresh in people's eyes, so that it's not just, same old, but that there's an element of doing that. A lot of, I know in trainings throughout the OU, there are a lot of hypothetical case studies that are done that will introduce the newest set of programs, a newest set of standards that are being rolled out, so that people, to the back to the hypochondriac, what could go wrong, are now starting to think about those things as well also, in terms of those things going wrong. And it's like, wow, thank you for putting those standards into place. They really mean a lot. They're very important. I never thought about that before. And that's really like what you want to get out of people when they come into a training program, when they come into the organization, or when we're rolling out a new set of standards that'll just help further, protect the participants, the volunteers, the staff, and the organization.
I would love if you would add, and I'm going to ask really as we approach the end, I want each of you to, instead of me like prompting you with a question, I'm sure you have tons that you'd want to say and specific ideas that you think you'd want to share that would be most helpful to those listening who want to really raise the game in terms of this. So Lauren, I'm very happy to hear what you have.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Keevy said about change. And I think oftentimes what happens is when something horrible happens and a community becomes aware that something really alarming has happened, everybody wants to talk about it, and everybody wants to make sure that their community's policies, procedures, knowledge, awareness, education is up to speed. And, when something happens in our community of that nature, our phones ring off the hook because everybody wants to say, does my school have good enough policies? What do we need to be doing? And I think, obviously that's very reactive. It's very normal, of course, and it's very reactive. And I think if there's a way for us to continue without being alarmists, without us having to focus on the negative all the time, but if we can shift that mindset instead of being reactive and saying, now we are at a place where we all know that this can happen because we've seen it. We've had it, unfortunately, horribly, we've had enough experience to know that this can happen in our Jewish communities. And so therefore, instead of being reactive, it's time for us to be proactive. And I think people are more and more open to that. Unfortunately, because of the terrible things that have happened, that more schools, more camps. I mean, we are getting calls from camps all the time saying, we really need to button up our policies. Can you take a look? Can you help us think through them? Because I think people are really recognizing that we really can't operate from a place any longer being reactive. The expectation from parents and community members and our culture is now that we're going to be proactive and we are going to protect our children, and we are going to be very aware of what our policies are rather than creating them after the fact.
That is a critical shift, and I'm glad you highlighted it. Dr. Berger?
I want to basically apply what Lauren was saying in terms of being proactive to what Keevy was calling being hypochondriasis. It's not hypochondriasis. Like what I tell the counselors when you go into a bunk, I want you to look around. I want you to look up and down and say to yourself, what could a kid do here? right? We used to have rafters. We don't have them anymore. But they all knew how to climb onto the rafters. And they know how to swing from the rafters. And if the counselor doesn't say on day one, that's not something that you can do, they're going to do it. So I like the proactive thing. I also really want to see the OU's protocols, because I think I'm the only one on the screen who hasn't seen them. And I think I'm saying that not just because I really want to see them, but I think we'll have to share with each other. One of the things that the camp started to do recently, it's not so recent, it probably goes back about 10 years, is that they take the senior staff to the American Camping Association conference. There's a tri-state convention. It's not a Jewish thing. There are a very substantial number of Jewish participants. There are even a significant number from Orthodox participants. I think people from Yakov were there. I didn't see people from other parts of NCSY. Camp Romumu was there, and Ahuvah is there. Sternberg is there, and Percals, I think, brought about 30 people. But we will get trained on an ongoing basis. That's in addition to any continuing education that we do for ourselves, because there's knowledge out there. And if there's knowledge out there, we want to be aware of it so that we can do our best. And Baruch Hashem, I constantly want to be educated in terms of what's going on. So anything you can share, I'll be very happy to
we can readily share it with you, because we actually share it with the world. If you go onto the websites of the various departments like NCSY, their policies, their safety policy is right there for anybody to have it. It's not a secret. It's not something which even people only get upon enrollment. It's public. It's public because of what Lauren said at the beginning, that when we start talking about these things and we're very clear and open about them, it creates an environment where people are just more comfortable, dealing with issues as they arise. I think they should be public also, because as Desmond said, there's so much to learn from it, and there's so much to be to almost, excuse me for saying it this way, but it's almost like to be proud of, as to say, look where we've come as a community in dealing with these issues, and therefore being able to create an atmosphere of prevention. We're never going to be perfect. As a community, we're never going to be perfect. As long as there are human beings walking around and interacting with other human beings, mistakes will be made. Not just mistakes, but wrong things and malicious things will be done, and people will try to take advantage of others. That's the nature of the world. But our job, I would imagine we all agree, our job is to be able to, when those mistakes, first of all, create an environment where those mistakes are less likely to happen, where there are the windows that look in and so on and so forth that make the mistakes less likely to happen. And then that they're noticed, the problems are noticed, and that the problems are promptly and effectively addressed. And to me, I'm not a mental health professional, but have worked in the community for a long time, and to see where we've come as far as that goes, in terms of being able to notice it and bring it forward and address it. It's the difference between allowing a problem to fester, turn into a disaster, and heading it off as quickly as possible when you have the greatest chance for resilience and recovery and prevention of further harm. So that's our goal. That's, I think, the goal of each of us.
And I think that's, as you said, it's the healthiest place to do it is when you're doing it from a proactive state of just saying we need to improve and we need to get better. One thing that we've been talking about all at the same time interweave, but we were talking about like the abuse at home, that to keep your eyes open for stuff like that and to realize that and be educated around those things, but also the God forbid on a program, or something like that, and being able to keep your eyes open, for those things as well also. And they're two very different skill sets and two very different, like being able to, awareness factors of realizing what to approach, and that that's a really tough balance, to be able to, especially if you're young people, Rabbi, like you were asking me before, in terms of being able to do that, being able to be mature enough to realize, issues at a home and issues, within a program themselves, and hence what I said before in terms of the different layers, but also as Dr. Berger said before, that there's knowing who to turn to and knowing that, encouraging people to be able to turn to the right people all the time. One of my common refrains when I was there was always, bump it up. Like you just gotta talk to more people. You have to let other people know. Don't be bashful. Don't hide behind certain things. You got to keep on bumping it up. It's New York City, right? Subway used to be, if you see something, say something. And that's it. Like the constant communication, us talking about it now, but even within any one of these environments, so essential and so key to be able to do that. And lastly, just not to think that creating boundaries and standards is like rosy and easy and simple to do. It's not. You're trying to achieve programmatic success and organizational success. But more importantly than any of that is keeping everybody safe at the same time. And you're going to go ahead and have to figure out how to weave those two things together so that safety always comes out on top and that the program will still be a great program. But the safety will always come out on top no matter what. So just a little glimpse in. So don't think that you could revamp standards in like 3 days.
One of the problems with this podcast is I'm realizing how much I miss Keevy since he left the OU. Really, thank you for all that you put in and for the impression that remains, and that keeps everything really strong. I just want to give a chance if before I wrap it up, if anyone has a closing thought that they wanted to share, please.
I think that, I guess, one of the nice things about working in a camp or in any organization is that there is a team. And I think each of us knowing our role within the organization and who we report to, and that we're not doing it alone, that, you're going to consult with somebody else, that there's somebody else who's going to understand the discomfort in making the report, that there's somebody else who's going to understand the necessity in making the report. I think that this is a tremendously valuable aspect. And I'm sitting in my private practice office. Private practice, you don't have that. We do have lawyers that we consult with, and we do have, but you don't have that same kind of, we're all part of the same team. And I think being part of a team just really allows each of us to work together and ensure the safety and well-being of our campers, of our staff, and really help people be successful in life. I mean, I like working.
I know Lauren wants to say something, but what I want to say actually it has to do with Lauren. I can't agree more enthusiastically with what you just said, and I think it's a piece of the framework which Keevy created. But I was a congregational rabbi for a while, and these issues came up. In fact, that's the reason why I have white hair. They came up, and there was a cardinal rule for 100 reasons, starting of which the first one is that a rabbi's not an expert in this, and the other thing is a rabbi or an organizational leader might have all kinds of concerns that they're worried about. In addition to the particular safety of the individual who may be hurt or may have been hurt, they have to maybe also worry about whether they're worrying about the organization, whether they're worrying about the alleged perpetrator. There are so many different pieces, and you can't do this by yourself. And I learned early on that before Lauren was at Chana, Nancy Aiken, Dr. Nancy Aiken was there. And whenever something came up, she was at the table, because here you have an expert, and outside of your organization, and outside of your own personal biases, and they bring that expertise, and they already have that bridge well constructed to the Child Protective Services and to the expertise, and Lauren stepped into the role and plays that role for so many principals and for rabbis and for individuals, so that it's a team. And we have to be humble. This is like a really hard area, really hard issue, and none of us knows everything, and there are no clean and neat ways where you can solve the whole thing. And we all believe in the mandated reporting, and we're going to do it, and we will do it. But as Lauren said many times, it's not the panacea. It doesn't just say, oh wow, we gave it over, did what we were supposed to, and now we're finished. We might be able to check the box, but we haven't necessarily solved the problem. There's so much value in the team, and I think when somebody makes a report, it goes to an outside consultant who becomes part of the team. We have our own people who deal with it, but right, I think we have
That's right. The standards, it goes to an outside firm that are the initial intake, and they're the ones that really do the entire assessment and take care of it all, and are the ones to if the OU professionals need to be involved, then they will. Otherwise, they're just going to handle it. And it's really like a gold standard of no conflict of interest or anything. Like they're just on the outside doing it, and and bring it full circle. So and sometimes that means, like in the case of reporting, though, right? So like there's somebody suspecting child abuse at home, of one participant. So like they'll work with this outside firm, but ultimately this 24-year-old staff person is going to have to call the respective reporting agency and be able to do it, and that takes a lot of strength and courage. But having a team around you, as was pointed out, is incredibly encouraging for that, and it's part of being a mandated reporter, doing it, making it happen, and ultimately, the way I started off, these are all in place. Standards all the time are in place to keep everyone safe, and that's the ultimate achrayus of us as communal professionals, as human beings, is the safety of the participants, safety of the people, and the safety of each other throughout. So,
Lauren?
I was going to say very similar to what you said and what Dr. Berger said about team. And I was going to say thank you to you, Rabbi Hauer, because, I think what is so critical, not only having people that are so educated in this space and organizations that really thrive in this space, we can't do any of this if we don't have a community that values this. And we don't have an organization like the OU, and we don't have clergy behind that saying, this is our value. This is the culture we want to create. This is where we came from, and this is where we need to be. And without that value and that culture being created by an organization like the OU, it doesn't even get to us. And we don't even get to do this work. And so I wanted to say to you, thank you for creating that team. Thank you for making this such a big priority and valuing this as such an important issue, because that is really what creates the tone and the movement for all of us sitting here to be able to do the work that we do.
You're very kind. I want to thank each of you. I want to thank each of you for the past hour, and I want to thank each of you for decades of work which you've done in order to bring us where we are. And I want to repeat something which I said to the group, where we spoke about schools. So the listeners might be a little bored, but I want to say it to you, because it's really something which is inspiring. We when you think about tshuva, about self-improvement, return, like what do we think about? And we have this tendency, we bury our head in our Yom Kippur prayer book, in our machzor. We sit down and we make a cheshbon hanefesh. We evaluate ourselves and think about this thing that I want to improve and that thing that I want to improve. And it's true. That's a piece of tshuva. That's the individual story of tshuva, of self-improvement. But there are two realms of tshuva. One is what the individual does to get better, and what is really what a community does to get better. And it's not a homily. When we, the Talmud distinguishes between the two. It speaks about the tshuva of an individual and the tshuva of a rabbin, of a community. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur is not the anniversary of when a few individuals said, I'm going to start speaking more nicely to others, or I'm going to stop shoplifting, or I'm going to start making sure that I pray on a daily basis. No, what happened was the Jewish nation came from Sinai, and they created a golden calf, and it was a national failure. It was a national failure. And on Yom Kippur, we completed the process where God said, okay, I forgive you for the national failure, and I'm going to give you the Torah back. I'll give you that second set of tablets. It's really the story of the tshuva of the community. And sometimes when we look at ourselves, we say, okay, I'm going to fix this. Community, we're like stuck. And this conversation is an illustration of how a community grows and how a community does tshuva, how a community, and this is like the whole world, like nobody in in the world understood the subject that we're talking about. And whether it took us longer or we were just as fast or we were slower than anybody else, the ability to understand what it means to create safety for a child in these personal ways. Once upon a time, we didn't know and we didn't understand and we couldn't talk about it. And if we would talk about it, we wouldn't know what to say and wouldn't know what to do. And communities can improve. And if we can improve in this, we can improve in other things. And it's deeply inspiring. It's really very, very special. And I think everybody here, each one of you, is really part of moving that along. So again, thank you. Thank you for the hour. Thank you for the discussion. And thank you for being a goad for, God willing, further growth and further improvement.
Thank you so much for joining us for these 4 episodes focusing on child safety. There were so many powerful moments, and one that really stuck out to me, probably my biggest takeaway, is that the child can never be afraid to tell a parent anything. And while there are things that they may not want to say to a parent, and that's understandable, it is our job as the parent to make them feel as comfortable as possible to either tell us, and if not to tell us, to at least have a safe adult that they can talk to. I recently heard Rabbi Daniel Kalish, in a completely different context, say that if we look at children as souls, they're more likely to share because it takes away the shame. And I think it fits perfectly as a closure for this month. As parents, the more that we can look at our children as souls, as the neshamos that they are, not just for the sake of them telling us things, but in general, we will approach our children in such a more healthy way and will establish a more meaningful and close relationship with them, which is the strongest defense we can have in this topic of child safety. Again, thank you for joining us. The feedback for this month has been incredible. So thank you for listening or for watching, and thank you for sharing the feedback. It's very meaningful. And make sure to subscribe wherever you podcast, whether it's on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is. Follow us on Instagram, @JohnOlive_parenting. And next month, we're going to be discussing the emotional health of our children, which ties in well with this topic as we continue our parenting hierarchy, kicking off with the world famous Dr. David Palkovitz. Looking forward. Thank you again for joining us.